So let's jump into CALPUFF View to take a look at some of these new features. So the first thing I'd like to go over is, in fact, the spray source, just so you can get a feel for how it looks within the new CALPUFF View version 9. I have a sample project here, and this project was actually just built straight out of the CALPUFF User's Guide, the new version 7 addendum, which included a sample spray source release file. So here I have two lines representing my spray source there. You can see they're pointed in direction from northwest to the southeast, but you can angle them depending on whatever direction the aerial spray actually occurs. And the way this was added is under the CALPUFF menu, I have the external source files option. You'll note all of the different source types here that you could have as external source files, and these tabs are controlled by the model version. So if you're going all the way back to the EPA approved modeling system, you're only going to see the source types applicable to that modeling system: point, area, volume, and line. And then as you switch modeling systems, you get additional options including flare and road in the version 7 system, and now this new spray source within version 7.3. Just like any other external source file, we have the viewing option and the graph option. So within the graph option, it'll actually plot out the time varying emissions of each one of your sources. There's two different pollutants in this file as well. So one is emitting at 0.1 gram per meter per second. The other is emitting at 0.5, or 0.05, excuse me. The format of the file itself is pretty typical of other external source files. So I have here the exact file that I am now working with in my example spray case. You see the header records there, which in this case it describes quite well the format of it. We have a starting point with coordinates and elevations, plus the height above ground from which this spray is released, some initial dimensions of the rod, and then the secondary coordinates, the ending coordinates of the dispersion pattern with some additional droplet parameters, and then the emission rates of the pollutants that are identified here. So I have a release that is going for just about 6 hours here, from hour 4 to hour 10 in the morning. And then it has one set of dispersion characteristics for the first part of the release, and then the second part of the release, the next several hours where it is releasing. And so you can move this position, these sources in time. You can also change the emissions with time. It gives you a lot of control over how to disperse the source. So switching back to CALPUFF View, once the model is run, you can then see the dispersion pattern of the release there from each of these sources. So it's a pretty simple source to work with. The next feature I wanted to show off was our shapefile land use incorporation. We've had this request from users in the past for a while, and we were finally able to incorporate that into the software, and we're really excited about this. So with the geophysical processor for the CALPUFF modeling system, there are limits to the types of files that you can have, both for terrain and for land use. And of course, we have our WebGIS functionality, which has been in there for some time, which supports a variety of formats: global land cover data like the GLCC. In Europe, we have the CORIN database, the USGS files, both NLCD and CTG for the United States, and then in Canada, the EOSD. But shapefiles present another avenue of data. And so for shapefile support, what we've done is we've expanded the land use creator capabilities. If you're not familiar with the land use creator, it allows you to build your own land use data files in one of the supported formats for the CALPUFF modeling system. So I'm going to demonstrate the USGS CTG format today. And this is a case that we were modeling in British Columbia, just a sample case. And from here, I can import a variety of land use data files. And so this project already has a shapefile ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and open that one. And what it's going to ask me for is some additional information about this file. The shapefile coordinate system, so that it can reference the coordinates of the file to the project datum. And here these coordinates are geographic, latitude, longitude. I have to pick which attribute of the shapefile represents land cover. Here it's pretty obviously identified as cover type, cov type. And from that, it lists all of the attribute values, and then I have to reference those to various land use categories of the USGS CTG system, since I'm producing a CTG format file. So I could come through here and individually select these and identify which attribute from my file aligns with which land use category in the CTG file, or you can use the import capability and build your own template for those values to easily import into your project. So you can see I've identified, category 11 within my shapefile represents perennial snowfields in CTG. And here's some forested categories and how those translate and so on. Once those are applied, it analyzes the shapefile, and it takes a few minutes then to import that data into the land use creator, such that it can map the specific categories out. One thing that you'll see within this particular example is the data that I'm importing, this first shapefile, is not going to cover the whole domain, and that's okay, because my land use creator is capable of bringing in multiple shapefiles such that it can fill the entire domain that I need to cover for the purposes of my project. You'll also notice, because you can select other file formats to create from the land use creator. For example, the generic file is a very high resolution file. The generic file can be as high as, say, 30-meter resolution for your land use data. So if you select one of the higher resolution output formats, generic or the USGS NLCD, it will take much longer to import the shapefile data, because it's going to be reading a lot more output categories than it would in this composite terrain grid format, CTG format, which here, as you can see behind, is 200-meter resolution. Still very high resolution though, so it gives a really good basis to the project. And so I've imported the first of my shapefiles here. You can see it's only covering the top half of the domain. I would then go in and import the second file to complete out the domain. And then I would have this great land use file that I can take and import directly to the geophysical processor here under the land use files section, so that when I then view my land use data for this area, I get this nice covered high resolution land use grid for my project. The land use creator is also useful for updating areas that the land use data file itself may not have been updated for. So if you're using a land use data file that's maybe 10, 15 years old, you can use the land use creator to select areas as a polygon and update those areas to reflect what the current land use may be for a more up-to-date project. Then we also have some new enhancements to meteorological data processing. I have a sample project here that is located in the southern central United States. And this project contains a number of surface observation stations to run through the meteorological preprocessors of the CALPUFF modeling system. Here I'm processing 2001, and you can see from the file format, all of these files are of the NCDC TD3505 file format. The S-merge preprocessor, which is used to read observational data, surface-based observational data for preprocessing into the CALPUFF modeling system and then integration into CalMet. The code of S-merge doesn't always play nicely with these TD3505 files. And so what we have done internally is identified what it is about these files that SMERGE doesn't particularly like. And then in the background, when we process this data, we're treating it as a way to bypass the bad data that SMERGE is incapable of reading. So seamlessly, without you even noticing, it's going to be able to read all these files and avoid the pitfalls of crashes that would occur with the native SMERGE executable. So as I process these files, I'm not seeing any issues in the background of these files stopping the SMERGE process from running. Once it finishes, another new feature will appear, and that's going to be the QA spreadsheet. So it's analyzing each of these files, and what CalMet wants is to have data for every single meteorological variable for every single time step. If it doesn't find a variable from any of the stations for a given time step, it's not entirely happy and wants to have that data in there so it can have a complete full run and analysis to conduct for each time step in CalMet. So it says my SMERGE processing is done, but then it informs me that there are missing hours and that CalMet would fail if I was going to try to use only station data in this run. By reviewing this QA file, which comes up as an Excel spreadsheet, I can now analyze the makeup of what is missing from these files. And I can see it's the last 5 hours of the last day of my processing year. So here, because the TD3505 files are, they are written in Greenwich Mean Time, in Zulu time, I really need the additional hours from the start of 2002 day 1 to adjust for the time zone conversion. So the easiest thing in this case would be to acquire those first couple hours of the day in GMT so that the time zone conversion can get the proper data in. If I had other missing hours here in observation mode, I could also take a look at this missing hours hybrid mode tab. And what missing hours hybrid mode would inform me of is if there are gaps that can be addressed through the use of, say, WRF meteorological data or MM5 data, those gaps would be shown as filled here, and it would then only show me the hours that absolutely have to be filled in order for CalMet to do its processing. So with this new surf.dat_QA spreadsheet, it's a little bit easier for users to identify where there are gaps in their meteorological observations so that they can fill those more easily and create a project more quickly. Other improvements include the ability to more easily define a gridded subset of receptors in the CalPost options. So I'm going to quickly define a little sampling grid here. I'm going to say that I have a sampling grid that spans my entire domain, a whole lot of gridded receptors here. And then back in the CalPost options, if I wanted to select only a subset of these gridded receptors, as shown here, the big green blob, I can define a subset quite easily just by taking in a couple parameters here. I'm going to say somewhere around the middle of my domain, I now only want to activate these receptors in green that are highlighted in the middle. And it makes the process of identifying which gridded receptors I'm actually selecting compared to how we used to do this. And then you could even come in and, of course, select individual grid cells depending on the needs of your project. We've also identified some areas for clarification, such as the new label of time series. Previously, it was called selected days. That was based off of how CalPost identified some of these selections. We've renamed this time series to make it a little bit easier to understand that if you want time series output from your run, this is the section of the program where you would come to do that. There are, of course, other features incorporated into CALPUFF View version 9.0. You can go to our website to view the current release notes of the product, which will step through each of the changes that we have implemented into this version of the release. Also important within those release notes is a list of known issues. There are a couple known bugs in some of the versions of the model, such as the EPA-approved CalPost not accepting hourly background data concentrations. And there's a bug identified in the version 7.2.1 of the CALPUFF model and how that operates. So it's important to check those release notes for those known issues and to get an understanding of all the additional changes to the software that I haven't covered today. All right, well, in the interest of respecting everyone's time, I want to say thank you one more time. If you have any more questions, feel free to shoot us an email, support@weblakes.com, and we hope you all have a wonderful day.